We are here today to talk a little bit about the ill health liability insurance, which the fund have permitted employers to gain access to as a risk management tool. And we're going to chat a little bit through getting a bit of a better understanding of ill health early retirement, how that creates a risk for employers, how the insurance itself can be a possible solution to that, and also a little bit about the approach of that as well, and the impact of um, contribution rates and how that kind of carries across. So a few of those things. We'll also touch on COVID-19. Now that's at the moment that will be quite a a lot of it will be kind of initial. It's kind of anecdotal. We're not really much certainty on it, but we do sometimes get some questions on it, and we're starting to see some things beginning to come through. So people do ask that question because obviously we've just come out of a pandemic. So cover a little bit on that as well, and then we'll open up to if there's questions at the end. So if anybody has the insurance already and has any questions, they can ask that. If there's any general ones. Also, as you're going, just feel free to pop a question into the chat or put your hand up as we're going, or you can wait to the end and we can cover it then. So just to give it another minute or so, in case anybody dives in late. We'll just crack on, I think. We'll start because the agenda's a nice easy bit. So the specifics of what we're going to cover today is, first of all, we're going to go through our health early retirement. Then we're going to go through the how that creates a cost. We're going to go specifically into Hertfordshire's experience. That'll be up to a particular point. We can also touch on some of the more recent experience that's specific to employers in the fund who have had claims. So I'll just touch a little bit on that as well. Go into the health liability insurance, cover that COVID-19 impact, and then into the funding consideration. So kind of what I said a moment ago, and we've got those lovely photos of Barry and myself again. Sorry, Barry, I keep bringing that up, but guys, Barry had hair in those, and you'll see in mine.
Back in the good old days.
Back in the good old days, a long time ago since I had it. Anyway, I digress. Ill health early retirement. First of all, understanding where this cost comes from, how it arises, the initial part, and kind of like in maths, the first principles of where this all arises. So the LGPS has a lot of benefits to it when members or their employers join the LGPS and the members are in. There are a variety of benefits they can get. So if you think about what could happen to a member could, an active member actively contributing at your employment, they could stay at your employment all the way through to their normal retirement age, and then they'll get their retirement pension at that stage. The person could leave and go to a different employer, and they would retain that accrued service in the scheme as a deferred member. The member could unfortunately die in service, and they would get a payment on that. Or another option is that the person could be unwell and be unable to continue to work, so they get given ill health early retirement. Obviously, there could be other types of early retirement. There could be redundancies, those types of things. But what we're looking at today is the ill health early retirement and what that means for them. So there's 3 particular tiers of ill health, and the cost to employers depends upon the tier, and the tier depends really upon the severity of the member's condition. So if you think about it from the top, you've got tier 1, which is really the most severe of in terms of medical prognosis on it. So the person is not likely to return to work before state pension age, being able to gain gainful employment. There are more specific terms in the regulations, but broadly, not returning to work before state pension age. So that member, they're entitled to immediate payment of their accrued pension, plus 100% of their future service to retirement. So if you've got somebody who's much nearer retirement age, so they're say they're at 60 just now and they've been in for a few years, they'll get that pension they've paid at 60, the accrued pension, and they'll get a couple of years extra service, a few years of extra service to their state pension ages. Under Tier 1, 100% because they're never expected to return to work. Tier 2, not quite as generous, but that's because the condition is expected is not quite as, again, I'm using the word severe here. So Tier 2, they're not expected to return to work for at least 3 years, but probably before state pension age. So again, they get early payment of pension that they've accrued, and they get given 25% of their extra service, their future service to retirement. And it's not 100% because they are expected at some point to be able to return to work. So they only get a quarter of the service. However, they are still getting given an enhancement of service. So that's additional service, pensionable service, creates a bigger pension for the member. And then the third tier is almost an intermediate one. And this is where they're not really sure, the occupational health maybe aren't sure of the member's condition. Will they be able to come back to work within 3 years? It's not really certain. So they'll get payment of their accrued pension, but they won't get any enhancement. And what happens, that's just payable for a maximum of 3 years. And in the middle of that period, it should get reassessed and are they fit to return to work? Great. If not, continue with the tier 3. And then at the end of the period, again, fit to return to work? Great. If not, then they would get given the tier 2 because they then at that stage had been off for 3 years, which is what the tier 2 would have expected. And they would get an uplift at the end. So they go from a tier 3 to a tier 2. Now that's quite complicated, that little bit, but just a key point to remember there is tier 3 is itself is temporary. At the end, it could go up to a tier 2, in which case it gets classed as a different type of retirement. One other quick caveat, which I haven't put on here actually, I think I maybe should have put that as a bullet point, is that there is another type of ill health retirement that you can get, and that's for deferred members. So those members who used to be at your employment contributing, and they are now retaining a deferred pension, so a pension under your employer, they too can go off on ill health early retirement, even though they're no longer currently working for you. They can get ill health early retired for that deferred pension, but they don't get an enhancement of service. So there is nothing where there's extra service awarded or such like. So it's payment of that deferred pension that gets paid immediately. They aren't paying any contributions in. That's not specifically covered on the insurance, but I'll touch on that a little bit later. So that's the member, that's the benefits that you would get. It relates to really their medical condition on that. And how does that impact you as an employer? So let's have a quick look at an example. And this will be a similar example to people who might have seen this before, but let's quickly go through that. You've got an academy, so let's assume that their payroll is £1 million per annum. Doesn't necessarily, don't need that right now, but let's retain that. Academy employee, somebody who's 45 years old, been in the scheme for 10 years on a £25,000 salary. That particular member, if they were to go off in ill health, they're at that age, the tier 1 ill health pension, that would be 16,000 per annum broadly for them. So the person's been in for 45 years, they've been in for 10 years, 45-year-old, and they're not, so that's young, but not incredibly young, not got lots of service, and they've also not got a massive salary there. That's not the, your highest paid individuals. So still brings out £16,000 per annum pension. Looking at how we then think, well, how does that create a cost for you as an employer? Again, if you've ever been to any types of actuarial presentations, quite often there will be a slide along this explaining how the benefits are made up and the timings of when payments come in. So under a normal retirement, if you think about this member particularly recruited at 35, would be stayed until normal retirement. You've got contributions coming in, that's the blue line. So that's contributions come in, they get paid into the fund. That's extra assets going in to meet the pension liabilities. Person gets to normal retirement age at 68. They get a lump sum paid out, that's the big yellow bar. They get a pension, and that pension increases with pension increases. And then there's a dependents pension payable if the member passes away, the dependents pension is payable. So you've got this period of time from normal retirement at 68 to expected age of death, which is 88 for this particular case, and then a dependents pension. So if we're looking at this, the comparison to have, and I'll flick back and forth in a little second, is between this and the next one, which is under ill health. So if we then look at actual cost on ill health early retirement, what you can see is things have shifted here. So there's less contributions coming in. So that blue line is lower, so there are less assets coming in there. The lump sum still payable. The member's pension now, if you can see that's, look back, the amount of pension physically paid is much larger because it's payable over a larger period of time. Potentially you might get a larger pension as well with pension increases being paid over that longer period as well. So there are less contributions going in. So just very quickly, contributions coming in, blue line, a little bit less there, and then much larger pension payable in that respect. So from an employer's point of view, what does that mean? Well, this creates what we would call a strain cost, so an extra cost to the fund. And if you think about that, that's the actual cost of benefits being greater than the expected cost of benefits here. So really all the difference is all that extra yellow versus what it was in the first slide under kind of normal retirement. So in our example where we had the member who was on 16,000 pension under that tier 1 ill health, the strain cost that's associated with that is £320,000 for that particular member. So you can see how directly the member, not out of the ordinary size in terms of data for that member, pension looks quite high and the strain cost itself can be quite high. Now, as an employer, that cost must be met by the employer some way. So that's the thing to remember. That's where then the cost comes through. The fund will pay the pension, but the employer would then meet the cost on that. Now, if we look at some of the fund's own kind of experience, so real world example on it. Now, the key point about this one that I would say is this is particular data that relates from the period of 1st of April 2014, which was when the care scheme came in, and this was up until the 30th of September 2020. So it's into the pandemic, but not the very recent part of that period on it. So that's covering a particular period for it. What you'll see there, we had an example where that was £320,000 for the strain cost. Went through that worked example, but in the fund, the average strain cost for these cases over that particular period was 82,000. So not quite as big, still substantial on it. Average of 32 ill health early retirements per annum at that stage, and again that's a key point at that stage, so that's 32 across the fund per year. Tier 1 cases, vast majority, you see that 86%, so more people would be going off on the higher tier where they get more generous benefits and higher strain costs, so a larger proportion of that. Of the cases, there were 57 of them over 100,000, and 23 of those were also over 200,000. And in the fund, the highest individual strain cost at that stage was £714,000, which is quite a large amount on it. Now, when we're talking about averages, there's a couple of points to think about here very quickly, and that is, yes, there are large numbers there. There may well be people who get ill health early retirement who are, a part-time employee who is near their normal retirement age, because if you think about people who are likely to go off in ill health, that likelihood increases as you age, and your health may deteriorate as you get older. So therefore, you might have some relatively small ill health early retirements that come in, but then equally you can have these absolute whoppers of cases where the membership itself is not, the member data is not wild within that. So Specific examples to compare. Here we've got a contractor, a town council, an academy. You can see the actual strain cost for these different types of employers. So you can see it's not always just at things like the council, the main council, or at private companies where it can be particularly high. It varies very much with the salary of the member, but also the age of the member when they go. And ill health is quite a random thing to happen, so you don't have so much, you don't have anything control over that. Now, that's us going through ill health itself. What are the regulations on it? What does the member get? How does that create a cost for the employer? What's the specifics in Hertfordshire there? How can we resolve that? So one option to do that is perhaps having some form of insurance to mitigate against that potential cost. So this is where our health liability insurance came in. So this was created way back in when the introduction of the 3 tiers of our health came in, because there was a fund where an employer had somebody going off at a small employer and they were about to invoice them for a cost and realised that that was putting that employer on a very shaky ground, and they wanted to see if there was anything that could be done, and they approached ourselves. We, you may know or may not know, one of our senior actuaries at the firm, John Wright, he went to the market and with the kind of come up with this, with a possible insurance solution, and Legal & General came up with something which actually mirrors what happens in the regulations. So this ill health early retirement essentially is this mirrors what happens. Rather than them paying the pension, they'll pay the strain cost out. So what happens is the insurer, Legal & General, they provide the cover. If there is a tier 1 or tier 2 ill health, now going back to our examples, the tier 1 and the tier 2 ill health, if you remember, they were the ones where you get the enhancement of service. So typically those costs will be higher because you get an extra service, so therefore extra pension payable for a number of years. Strain cost is higher. So those are the ones that would be covered by the insurer. So that tier 3 that we were talking about, that's only temporary, doesn't have additional service included. That's not included within the insurance. However, again, you don't need to remember this particular point, so feel free, I can follow up with again. If you took the insurance, somebody went in tier 3, then went to tier 2 afterwards at the end of that period, and you were still insured, the tier 2 would be covered because that's under the insurance cover. How do you pay for it? Well, the premium rate is similar to your contribution. You pay a rate of pay. The premium rate is 1.65% of pay, and that's until next 31st of March, so 31st of March 2023. The reason why it goes until that date, it runs from April to April, but you'll be aware, hopefully, of the actuarial valuation, which will be going on this year, which will keep everyone very, 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 very busy. You'll get new contribution rates that will come out of that. Now, they may stay the same, some of them, but they may well change. And the rates reflect the risk. So at that point as well, the insurer will reassess the risk and the rate may change. Unlikely to change massively. Usually you would see a change of 1.6 to 1.7 or 1.8 or 1.5 or 1.4. So around that same ballpark. The premium rate that you actually pay for the insurance, that might get offset against your employer contribution rate. Now, within Hertfordshire, that will vary very much on which employer you are, which type of employer, if you're in particular pools, because some may have that the reduction may already be taken off of your contribution rate. So there might already be an element off your contribution rate. So that can be, Barry might touch a little bit on which kind of pools that relates to, but ourselves and the team at Hertfordshire can also confirm if you've got any question about who might get that reduction. The insurance is available to all employers in Hertfordshire, so it's not just a particular size of employer. So if you were an employer who had only 1 or 2 people, you can still have the insurance. It still costs at 1.65%. So it's still the same amount. And there's also an employee assistance program and what's called a care concierge, which is in relation to care for the elderly and how you might go about doing that. That's a newish service that's open to all employees if you do take the insurance. So if somebody wants to go with the insurance, that service is there, and the employee assistance program as well. So not just for your LGPS members. So if you've got non-LGPS employees as well, they too can access that. And again, if anybody on the call has insurance, there's any questions about those as well, or indeed, please do ask me a question if you've got anything about how, what might be covered within that. Just as a quick touch back here onto that particular example that we had, if we were talking about looking at the strain cost we had of 320k in relation to the insurance, if we see the insurance there, the premium that would have been payable by that particular employer where we had the £1 million payroll on that, you see that the premium would have been 17,000 per annum for the insurance. The strain amount is 320. So in comparison, the amount that's coming back, how many years of premium it would take to kind of cover that cost, that's kind of the point of the insurance, is you fix that particular cost. And if something comes in, that cost can get met. Now, where do Hyman Robertson come into this? We, as part of kind of creating the product or the idea behind it, we also administer the insurance and deal with that with the fund. We provide possibly the correct word, the word I would use would be maybe translation services. So working with the fund, with the employers, with legal in general, with their underwriting claims to make sure that claims can be paid, queries can get resolved, and allowing out the introduction and using our expertise in the LGPS field. So we do that and do the administration. And part of that, we are remunerated by L&G for that. And that's currently 10% of the annual premiums paid for HLI. So what will happen is if you were to take out the cover, you would pay the insurer, you pay them directly as opposed to paying ourselves or paying the fund. And then the insurer would pay us if somebody takes it. Now, if somebody chooses not to take it, that is also completely fine. And we can go through quotations and things, and there's no cost for that. If people choose not to go with it, or if there's any queries, there's no cost or things like that. So how does HLI actually work in practice? Really simply, I'm aware when I say that, and I look at this, I think I could probably make this simpler, Martin. The member gets awarded ill health and they receive the pension. So the member's going to go off, they'll get their pension, that'll be paid to them. The fund will pay that pension. The cost of paying that pension, that strain cost that's arising, the employer will get or should get an invoice for that. So there is strain cost. Remember, members still going to get their pension regardless of if an employer pays that pension strain cost or not. If you've got the insurance, you then are paying your premium to Legal in General, and you would submit a claim to Legal in General. If they tick the box on that, and should be relatively straightforward as long as a series of documents have been submitted. That claim can then be paid. That gets paid to you as an employer, and then you would pay that strain amount to the fund. And what that means is then you've got the increase in your liabilities that because of the ill health early retirement, you've then got your claim payment coming in, and that should help to plug that gap. And the other part there, you can see at the top, you pay your contribution rate as normal, your employer contribution rate. You just continue to pay that to the fund, but you may get a reduction in the rate depending on the employer as well. So that's one other thing. If you're taking insurance, it's whether or not that applies. So there might be an adjustment that you have to make. I can cover anything else about the insurance and operations of these types of things. Feel free to ask any questions. Didn't want to go into too much detail on that just now. The next slide is one which we do get asked about. Now, just hopefully you can see this with the font. I'm aware that this one's a little bit pale on my screen when I put it up now, but hopefully it makes sense. So it's just this is quite relatively anecdotal. I've got an asterisk at the top, COVID-19 impact. This information is based upon initial data, so we've got it across multiple funds, not necessarily specific to Hertfordshire at the moment, but we'll start to see that kind of borne out as we get more data and as just things progress over the next few years. So first of all, the initial period of that pandemic, that first kind of year maybe, what we saw is like the ill health early retirements, the number reducing. So the physical number of ill health early retirements that we were seeing at that stage, there was a reduction initially. Now, few possible causes with that. The ill health themselves might have been happening in the background, but lots of difficulties with people getting used to working from home, how processes would work. Now that would include funds, employers, members, everything taking a bit of time, trying to get focusing on priorities at that stage, and then a bit of a gap in terms of when cases might start to come through. Now, funds, to be fair, have been very, very quick to get used to the working from home, so we tended to see that wasn't that might not have had as big impact as we thought. Other potential reasons for that: members seeking to retain their employment. So a lot of people you may have seen within your employment that there was. You might expect people to change jobs over those periods, but actually people wanted to stick with their employer because they didn't know what was going to be happening. So actually, again, maybe there was a reluctance to go for anything extra. So ill health they might have considered was an extra benefit. So it's potentially something around that. Another possible one, people just delaying seeking medical attention. So again, because of the pandemic, people not wanting to go to raise issues, to go to the doctors, to go to their employers about it. So actually, things were still happening in the background, but they just weren't popping up in terms of cases. So that was right in that initial period. We did see some reductions on it for some funds. More recently, as things, even from last year, things have started to pick up again. Case rates increasing to probably where I might expect them to be in the normal year. Are they more than they would have been? That's difficult to say at this stage, to say that is it a backlog. What we have seen is the percentage of cases which are tier 1 ill healths. So if you remember on our data, we had 86% at that stage of the cases in the fund were those highest cost ones. What we've seen is possibly even more tier 1s. So on a particular fund that we had recently, there was, I think, one tier 2 and every other one was tier 1 over that period. And that was actually correct. It looked wrong because you might expect a handful of those, but actually that was correct. So some possible causes for that. Again, they've got the ill health hat in the background. They're just starting to pick up. Members delaying the medical treatment, and that's a big thing which we'll all be aware of. It's in the news. NHS backlogs, people delaying treatment. Therefore, when they do seek treatment, things are more severe. Excuse the typo. Therefore, if the condition is more severe, potentially it's a higher tier. It's a bigger strain cost that comes through on that. So that might be why there's a higher proportion of that. And then again, it might be that COVID is having some kind of impact on ill health cases as well. So that's a little bit uncertain, but definitely the key thing that we've noticed recently is that proportion of tier 1s is probably the most kind of biggest insight that we're seeing on it. So the higher cost ones. Going forwards, literally finger in the air. Nobody knows. A few things that might happen. Again, possibly increase in number of cases and percentage which are tier 1, which is what we've seen, due to the continued backlogs, increases in cases due to long COVID, any long-term impact that we're not even necessarily aware of from somebody having had COVID in the past, and it maybe doesn't appear as long COVID, and something bears out as they age. It's potentially that. And the period of the pandemic where it was mostly lockdown, could something come out from mental health, anxiety, stress related? Is it more of those types of situations for people going in ill health? That possibly will come out. Again, we don't have that kind of data at the moment. The other thing I suppose it could happen is that you could actually see the reduction in cases because it's ill health is, whilst it's random, could be linked to work, and if there's more that work-life balance, that flexible working, and that leads to people not actually being looking to go on ill health, that's potentially a possibility as well. And whether people see that as a benefit or not, whether that continues into the future or not, that's very hard to say. So the initial thing, pandemic didn't cause, it caused initially a reduction. Then we've seen things kind of get back to a bit more normal. Is it slightly more than normal? Hard to say, but more severe cases. And going forward, it still is very much finger in the air in terms of how that impact would be going forwards. So there's a lot of information. Yeah,
sorry to interrupt. Just questions come in on the chat. So now might be a good time to answer it before I kick off on the funding impact. But I don't know if you can see it, but it's about how the premiums are calculated. So if an employer's got a LGPS payroll of £3 million a month, would the calculation of premiums simply be kind of 3 million times 1.65%, and therefore 49,500 a month? I don't know if you want to answer that one, or if it's based on a kind of annual figure or whatever. So if you want to answer that.
Yes. So, Sarah, thank you for your question, and Barry for pointing it out. Yes, it's broadly yes. The way that the premium rate is a set premium rate. The insurer uses a simplified accounting method for doing it, for the premium payment in pounds and pence. And what they'll do is get data as at the date that you might join. So let's say it was 1st of April for ease. They would ask, what is the total of your LGPS annual pensionable payroll? How many members is that? And the premium that they would quote you for that would be exactly as you say. It's your annual payroll times the premium rate times the period of time until the next 31st of March. So if it's 1st of April, it's a full year, it would just be your payroll times that premium rate, and it's your annual LGPS actual payroll that you're talking about. So, and that's taken at the start, and what will happen is they'll ask for data and see who are the people that are covered and what is their salary, and we'll just check that that matches up with what you expected. And that would be your premium then. And then at the next year end, they would ask for data again, say, okay, who are the people who are here this year? And if that has changed, L&G's simplified accounting method means that they just take that change in data. So if the salaries have went up, they assume that that increase in salary from one year to the next happened midway through the year, and they'll allow for that as an adjustment. If it went down, they'll do likewise and assume that there should be a credit due back. So your amount should be, it would just be kind of like fixed. So you don't have to make like a proactive calculate out each month, what is my actual salaries, what is 1.65% of those, send it across. What would happen is it'd be a snapshot at a period in time of your payroll. And then if you wanted to pay it monthly, you could pay that by direct debit, and it would literally be total payroll times 1.65% divided by 12, and that would be your monthly one. So hopefully that wasn't too much information and explains that, Sarah, but let me know if you've got any other questions on it. So happy days, I like that. Barry, is that okay to hand over to you to do?
Yep.
Next bits, right? Smashing. I will.
You're going to keep controlling the slides. So
yes, as best I can.
Next slide chat.
Yeah.
So yeah, Martin's covered a lot of the kind of practical sides of things in the background of the insurance itself. He's mentioned a couple of times about kind of what it means for your contributions to the fund and what impact it has on liabilities and so on. But we thought it'd be good to show a few different examples of the different potential scenarios that you might be in, both with and without the insurance, and indeed covering off the point that Martin made about if you're in one of the pools, so the Academy's pool or the Parish and Town Council's pool. If you're in those pools, then it's slightly different in terms of how it's treated from a contribution perspective, but kind of works out the same in the long run. So the first example we've got here is this is for any employers that are in the Academy's pool or the parish and town council's pools. So this particular example is the kind of no insurance. So if you didn't take out the insurance, and indeed if you don't experience any ill health early retirements initially, then what's happening here on the contribution side on the left here? The contributions that you pay into the fund are split into kind of primary and secondary, as you're probably aware, but ultimately they all kind of add together to make the total contribution you pay in. Now, for these employers that are in one of these pools, what's happened is we've already removed that 1.65% kind of allowance for the ill health element of what you'd be contributing, when we've said this is the contribution rate you have to pay into the fund. So that amount has already been removed from the contribution rates you pay in to the fund. Those contributions get paid into the fund, go into your pot of assets, and are kind of measured up against your liabilities in terms of giving you a funding level. So your assets compared to your liabilities gives you whatever your funding level is. So the key thing here is that the deduction for that kind of ill health element of contributions has already been removed from your contribution rate. Now this particular example, this employer that's in one of these pools doesn't take out the insurance and doesn't have any ill health early retirements, and so this is kind of the situation. The money goes in, there's no impact on your liabilities because there's no additional ill health early retirement strain, and all the contributions get paid into your kind of pot of money, if you like. If we can move on to the next slide, Martin. So the next slide is the same situation. So an employer in one of these pools doesn't take out the insurance, but then there's actually an ill health early retirement that occurs. Now on the left hand side is exactly the same situation. You've still been paying in the same amount of contributions. Those contributions have still been going into your pot of money, but then an ill health early retirement has occurred, and that has resulted in a strain cost that we mentioned earlier, which increases the liabilities. So that impacts your kind of funding level immediately at that point, because you're now paying out more, or expected to pay out more in benefits to one of your members than we thought before, and that means an additional liability appears on your kind of funding level balance sheet, if you like. I see there's a question popped up. Yes, you can certainly have a copy of the slides. It'll be useful because as much as I'll explain these charts as much as I can, there's quite a few of them, and it can be a bit mind-blowing. So you'll certainly be able to get a copy of these slides afterwards. So in this situation where there's this additional cost because of this ill health retirement, the fund expects employers to meet that cost. So we'll invoice as a result for that increased cost. So moving into the next example, we're still with that same employer, so still an employer in the Academy's pool or the parish and town council's pool. This time, the employer has taken out the insurance, and so that yellow bit in the kind of contributions bar is essentially the bit that had already been deducted off. You're now paying towards the insurance. So that amount, it doesn't come to the fund. The same amount of contributions are coming to the fund and going into your pot of assets, but this additional bit that was removed before for the kind of ill health allowance, that is then paid. That's the 1.65% of pay is then paid to the insurer. So as I said, the same amount of contributions going into the fund, because all that's happening is this extra bit is going to the insurer instead. This example is again that first example of if there isn't any ill health early retirements, then actually you're in the same situation on the right hand side. You've got the same amount of assets because the contributions going into the fund are the same. There's no change to your liabilities because there hasn't been any ill health early retirements, and the only change in this chart is that actually you're paying a premium to L&G for that insurance. So the next slide shows same situation, but actually you have an ill health early retirement occurring. And in this situation, yes, again, the left-hand side is the same as the previous slide. So you've still paid the same amount of contributions into the fund, into your pot of money. You've paid an insurance premium to L&G, but on the right-hand side, this additional strain cost on the liabilities in the far right has appeared, similar to what it did in the earlier example where there was an ill health retirement, but you've received a claim payment from L&G to kind of cover that off, and that gets paid across to you as an employer from L&G, and you pay across the strain cost to the fund. So essentially, kind of matches it off, and there's a cash injection to the fund. So increases your assets within the fund to kind of cover off the strain of the ill health early retirement. So that's how it works from the perspective of an employer in one of those pools. Now, what if you're not in one of those pools? So the next slide, we're kind of back to the first example of having no insurance and no ill health early retirements. So any other employers that aren't in those pools, the contributions you pay in just now, all of them go into the fund. There hasn't been a kind of deduction for this kind of ill health part, if you like. So you're paying money into your pot of money in the fund. All of those contributions go into the fund. And where you don't have insurance and you don't have any ill health early retirements, the assets are kind of unchanged, liabilities are unchanged as well. So you're in that kind of situation where all of the contributions going in and there's no impact there. Now, what if there was an ill health early retirement? If you're a kind of an employer that's not in the pools, as I say, you didn't take out the insurance. Contributions wise on the left, you're still in the same position. You're still paying all your contributions into the fund. So your assets are unchanged. If there's an ill health early retirement, that is a strain on the liability side. It adds to the value of what we expect to pay out to that member, and therefore it adds to the liability side of the equation. And again, as earlier, the fund will expect the employer to meet that cost individually. So moving to a situation where you're one of these employers, but you actually take out the insurance. If you take out the insurance, then what happens is you pay that same 1.65% premium to the insurer, but actually you can then pay 1.65% less to the fund. So you end up in essentially the same position as one of the employers in the pools, that you're still paying the same total amount, but some of it's going to L&G and the rest of it's going to the fund. Now, because you're kind of taking a bit off your contributions there, you'll have slightly less assets going into the fund because you're paying a little bit less in contributions towards the fund because some of it's going to the insurer. So in the situation where you have no ill health early retirements and you have the insurance, your assets will be slightly less because you've paid a little bit less into the fund. You've been paying it to the insurer instead, but your liabilities will be unchanged. Now, if you were in this situation, but there was an ill health early retirement, then your situation on the left is the same. You're paying the same overall contribution, but just some of it's going to L&G, and so slightly less of your contributions going into the fund. Strain cost arises on the right-hand side there because there's been an ill health early retirement, so your liabilities increase. What we expect to pay out in terms of pension benefits goes up. But you receive this claim payment from L&G to kind of match that off. So again, this cash injection goes from claim payment gets made from L&G to you as an employer. You pay across the strain cost to the fund, and that kind of tries to balance off that increase in strain cost. So I'm conscious that's quite a few slides to cover off various different scenarios. As I said, the copies of the slides, Anne and Taryn will be able to kind of forward those on to you after this session. But hopefully that's kind of giving you some kind of insight into how it works from a funding perspective in terms of how much money you pay and where it goes and what the impact is on the assets and liabilities within the fund. If there's any questions just now, I'm happy to take them. Otherwise, I'll hand over to Martin to do a bit of a kind of next steps and summing up. Oh, there's a question. Yeah.
Hi, Barry. Is it okay to ask this question verbally rather than typing it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So with this last example, my question is how does the employer go about getting this 1.65% adjusted? Is it when you take out the insurance, you then set up that you're paying this 1.65 to L&G, and then the fund know that 1.65 is being adjusted off your monthly return, or how is it logistically, who administers it and who facilitates everything?
I might hand over to Martin for that one in terms of the logistics, how that works.
That's fine. Yeah, so Sarah, good question again. The operations of that, if you were to take out the insurance, once insurance is going live, we communicate with the funds and tell them which employers have got the cover, and they would know that you have got the cover. But what can also happen is it would be ultimately it's the employers. I would say it's probably the employer's responsibility to just liaise. So it would be worth kind of proactively mentioning to the fund, if you did decide to go ahead with the cover, that you're taking out the insurance, and if you're entitled to the reduction, and then the fund can confirm and say yes, you would be entitled to that reduction. Then however those contributions are sorted at your end in terms of how that is paid across, so if it's a particular payroll provider or such like, that you need to then say, well, actually, instead of paying 21.65% to the fund, we're only paying 20% to the fund. We're taking 1.65 off. So it would be up to kind of you as an employer to then make sure that however those contributions are paid over, that you just liaise with your provider. But it's definitely worth just the initial very quick check-in with the fund to say, taking out the cover, just to give you the heads up, am I entitled to a reduction, the reduction of 1.65? And then you've got that confirmation for your records, for the fund's records as well. And then I would say, making sure that whoever your provider would be is doing that reduction, because I've heard in the past where people have thought that it's happened with the provider and it maybe hasn't. So always worth double checking that whether that's internally or whatever. So hopefully that answers that one.
Thank you. Yeah, that answers it. Thank you, Martin.
Cool. No worries.
Yeah, thank you. I had a question on the previous slide. I wonder if you could just show that for a second.
Yeah, 2 seconds. I will just.
Yeah, so this slide shows that on the assets column, there's slightly less assets. It just seems to me that over a period of time, what would the impact be of there being less assets as compared to if you weren't in the insurance scheme?
Yeah, and that very much depends on kind of investment returns and so on, and of the fund. But essentially, yes, you're paying in this 1.65% of payroll less than you would otherwise be doing going into the fund. So obviously you will have less assets than otherwise would be the case going forward. As you say, if you're doing this annually, then that could end up to kind of a reasonable amount of a deduction over a long period of time. However, this is the sort of thing that your contribution rate is kind of assessed on a kind of rolling basis every 3 years, and so this can be revisited every 3 years to see what the impact is, and you can see what the result of that is. You would hope for good investment returns that would potentially negates this kind of slightly lower assets, slightly lower contribution coming in. But ultimately, yes, there's less money coming in, so that might accumulate over time. I'll point out that that little yellow section of the assets there isn't by any stretch of the imagination kind of to scale. It's really just to show that there's slightly less assets. So it might look like actually quite a big chunk, but it's not. It's probably not in most cases that big a chunk of the assets.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just one additional little point there, Eamon, as well, without overcomplicating things. The reason that you get the reduction or you might have a reduction in the contribution rate for the health, which I forgot to touch on, is if you imagine really, really simply the contribution rate, so Barry's doing some very complicated maths about different events happening. So each person in the fund, they might, like we said, stay in the scheme till normal retirement. They might go off in ill health. They might go, they might die in service, and each of those potential outcomes, or go to a different employer, has a potential associated cost for that, and a likelihood or probability associated with it. So when that, and you're paying contributions, all those kind of things come in for each person. It all gets put together, and you get your kind of overall contribution rate for an employer, which kind of has a little bit of those elements in it. So within that, there's a little bit in which is potentially in respect of ill health, but it isn't ring fenced, as it were, for that. So if somebody does have an ill health, then that's not, the strain cost is still going to be a particular strain cost on it. So if you take the reduction, if there's a reduction in your contributions, that's meant to be broadly equivalent to what the ill health element is. So if you imagine if you didn't have any ill health, you're paying a little bit less, and then the assets, like you say, that's going to be coming in. That should still be broadly comparable with the remaining risks that you might have of all your other things. So you shouldn't be that you're kind of underfunding, as it were, because it's in respect of that little ill health bit. So if you didn't have an ill health at retirement, the remaining contributions should be enough to meet those other risks, all things being equal. If that's hopefully broadly simple, but do let me know if we can follow up with a bit more detail on that, or a bit of an explanation. But it's just as an aside as well. Some people ask that.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. So Barry, just keep me right if there are any other questions as I go just now. Just really just from here, if there are any particular questions, if you want to know any more information on it, regardless of whether that is wanting to get a quotation or wanting to just any kind of general questions about any of the stuff that we've covered today, feel free to give me a call directly. Always happy to chat for that. There's also just picking up the phone to me. You can drop ourselves an email. We've got a team who deal with questions and queries on that. That's our ihli@hyman's.co.uk email address. If there are any other questions, now Sarah, I can see one here. Let's have another quick look at this one.
I can have a first stab at this one if you want, Martin.
Yeah, cool. Sorry.
Yeah, no. So ultimately, is the reason for this insurance to take the risk away from the fund? Theoretically, employers taking out insurance should end up paying comparatively the same in costs. So there's a couple of different elements here. So the reason for the insurance to take the risk away from the fund, it's partly it does take the risk away from the fund because there might be some employers whereby obviously this could be a big hit and could impact their ability to pay for this cost. So it is good from a fund's perspective, but it's also good from an employer's perspective in occasions where this happens, because the employer will be in a lot less trouble if they're insured than if they weren't, in the sense that they wouldn't find themselves in that situation of struggling to pay this strain cost. So it is good for the fund, but it is also, the idea is that it's kind of good for employers. It's not necessarily going to be good for all employers, and kind of, I suppose it depends on your views as an employer on kind of risk management and whether you think actually we can take that risk and we can have that covered if there is such an event. Then that's absolutely fine. And there is, as we're saying, this isn't a kind of sales pitch. It's important that we point out that we obviously do get remunerated from the insurance company, but this is by no means a sales pitch. This is purely kind of setting out examples of different scenarios, and it will suit some employers and it might not suit others, depending on your own views more than anything else. In terms of whether if you take out insurance, you end up paying comparatively the same, that's kind of the general idea. It's balancing off kind of how much, as Martin touched on in answer to the last question, there will be a part of your contribution rate that you pay towards the fund that essentially says, okay, there is a little bit of that is some kind of allowance for some ill health retirements, and so if you take out that bit and say, okay, we're paying that to an insurance company instead, then yeah, you're going to comparatively pay the same. But I suppose the caveat to that is that you can be in quite a different situation depending on your experience of ill health retirement. So you might as an employer go through your whole existence within the fund and not claim on your insurance and have paid those premiums, and therefore you'll have not exactly lost out, but you've paid that insurance and not claimed on it. Whereas you could be in a situation where you've paid insurance and claimed on it. A lot of times it will vary quite a lot, purely based on the experience that you have of ill health early retirement. So it's a difficult one to say you're going to comparatively pay the same. I mean, in the long run overall, then that would be the expectation. But as we know, that's not everybody is average. Not every employer is average in terms of the experience they have. So some will benefit and some will not. And it's just, that's how insurance works in general with any kind of insurance. I suppose you could say the same for house insurance or something. You know, if your house doesn't burn down, then you've paid premiums and you've not kind of benefited from it as such, but you'll be glad if you had it at the time if it does. But yeah, it was a bit of a long-winded rant, but basically there will be some winners and losers on that front. The last thing I would say is that if you do take out the insurance, you're paying for that insurance, paying a little bit, and you're paying slightly less into the fund, but you're paying overall the same amount in contributions overall. Whereas if you don't take out the insurance, you're still paying the same amount overall, and that's actually still going towards your funding level. So it's not like you're losing out on that kind of 1.65%. It's not, this money is going nowhere. It's going into the fund to benefit your funding position. So even if you didn't have any insurance claims, didn't have any ill health early retirements rather, that money that you paid into the fund is still in your pot of assets. So it's not like you're kind of losing out on that amount of money. I don't know if Martin's got anything to add. I've just ranted for about 5 minutes, but
yeah. So the only thing I was going to say, exactly as Barry said, it might not. So from employer to employer, there might be two employers who, so I might have questions and queries from two employers who, on paper, seem almost identical, but they might make a different decision in terms of whether they want to proceed with the insurance or not, and that depends sometimes on a variety of factors. But quite often it will come down to their kind of perceived attitude to risk should an ill health occur. So actually, if one was to occur and it was 70 grand, that would be quite a lot for a lot of employers if they were to be hit with an invoice for that. Some employers that might not be. 20 grand might be a lot if somebody was to be hit with that. And then on the flip side, if it could potentially be, I think the biggest claim that we've had has been 1.3 million. That can be quite big for anybody apart from like the councils, the main councils. So it's kind of your employers tend to find that employers think about, well, what would the potential cost? So how comfortable would I be taking that risk of potentially reduced contributions, if that's what I was looking at, reduced contributions versus on the flip side, how comfortable would I be meeting the cost should a large one occur on that? So should have no insurance and I'm having a little bit less coming in. How comfortable am I with that position versus how comfortable would I be if something large did come in? And they kind of getting that right in their head, and with that will vary from employer to employer in terms of that decision, and we definitely can't make that for you. But whichever side of the coin you were to land at, that's totally fine in that. Again, hopefully not too much waffle there, but do let me know. So can't see any other hands up or any other questions. However, let's just check and see. Does anyone have anything else? Any other questions? I know that we're conscious of time. We have went on. I took a little bit longer than I expected to do for mine. But were there any other questions? Smashing. Okay. If there are any, please do feel free. Again, you've got my contact details. We'll circulate the slides afterwards. Feel free to send them on to ourselves. If you want to ask the fund in the first instance, feel free again to do that. And they can forward them on to us, or again, if they want to address them themselves, that's fine. But yeah, any questions at all, feel free to get in touch. Otherwise, have a lovely week. Hopefully it stays sunny and doesn't snow. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.